And now here's part 2 of our episode.
So, Sarah, didn't mean to cut you off before then, but now, would you
No, I was
please?
just too excited.
Well, we appreciate the enthusiasm. So now, tell us, why is that the standout track for you from the album?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the album leading up to this moment kind of dives into like not feeling like one doesn't belong, that the world is complex and always changing, and it's difficult to feel safe in that. Whereas at this moment, it's like realizing that even in spite of that, and maybe even because of the complexities of the world and because it's always changing, you are actually deserving of love, and everyone is the same in that and on equal footing in that, and that within the world, underneath the sycamore, we're all the same and we're safe. I mean, it's literally in the lyrics. So yeah, I don't know, just I am drawn to specific songs, both by musicality at first. Of course, I think most people can agree, when the music hits you and the rhythm and the melody, etc., that's what first draws you to a song. And as I discover the lyrics, it becomes a favorite of mine. And so this is where we find our peace. This is where we are, at least. That's just would hit me when I was driving and be like,
Yeah. So so you're hearing that lyric as "we are the same, we are both safe," and I see that there's some conflicting lyrical content out there online. Some say that, and what's ironic is that Ben said this in one of his KEXP concerts. He was like, all of those websites are wrong. But so you're hearing it as we're the same, we are both safe, right? Yeah, because there's some out there that are saying it's we're the same, we are both sane underneath the sycamore, which makes it a little bit different. It does kind of track in the same direction, though. Right?
I'm okay with both.
I like either read.
Yeah.
This sounds, for everything that I said in the intro about this album being a departure, I will say this track actually sounds to me like it could just fit on an older album. Like it's not, there's not as much electronic. I mean, it sounds like a Death Cab song. I'm not surprised. I mean, obviously Ben Gibbard has a very distinct voice, but even musically, this just seems like, you know, I'm probably not off Transatlanticism. That was just such like a big thing where they were sort of defining their sound. But like any album after that, before this one, it feels like it would, you know, slide right in. I mean, is that part of the appeal for this song? The fact that it has that, I don't know, that like melodic Death Cab for Cutie-ness, or probably. I mean, or do you dig, you know, the more electronic stuff on this album? And when I say electronic, I'm being, what's the word I'm looking for?
Reductive.
But it's not like, because when they say electronic, it's not like they did they like collaborated with Chemical Brothers or something and put out like something
it's
like
not
that.
A dance album.
Yeah, there's just like electronic touches here and there. Whereas this song just seems kind of straightforward. Is that part of its appeal for you?
I think probably. I'm sure that's some of the influence. I think the way the music swells too is just I like to feel like I'm being carried away by music. Like that's another reason why like Daylight by Matt and Kim is one of my favorites, because it just grabs you and takes you on a wild ride, and so I think that was probably the initial appeal, and then the lyrics really got me. But I agree that it sound, this of all of the tracks sounds the most Death Cab. So I'm sure that's why, that's part of why it's a favorite.
He's very intentional. You can sense his intention with everything that he does. And I'm not going to say that he's not, you know, like vulnerable or anything. Obviously he is, but there is a very methodical nature to Death Cab music in the way that I hear it. Would you agree with that, or like what would you say? Would you feel is like the energy that you feel coming from Ben when he's working at his best?
I can agree with methodical and intentional. And I think that particularly this album is a bit of a departure from like headspace, from intellectualizing into music. I personally feel that this album is more emotional and more philosophical than anything, which I guess philosophical could be intellectualizing, but I feel like philosophy is combining head and heart.
I like that.
And so I think there's a hint of that in there, but like because it paints with a broader brush, I think it's allowing for more emotion for you as the audience member, as the listener.
Yeah.
And I think that's what grabs the most is the emotion that you feel and the story that you get out of it. That's what certainly grabbed me is I don't personally experience this album in an intellectual way, and I think that might have been intentional on Ben's part.
Okay, cool. So he opens the door for you to be able to do that in some way.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That's maybe one of his successes.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. So you've talked about sort of like your ability to I like this, mapping your experience onto music, right? And people do that in different ways with music. And we've also talked about, sort of like in a higher level art thing, right? The difference between universality and generality, right? So, and again, I'm not trying to speak any sort of ill about this, but what would you say is the difference between something that is sort of general in terms of an album versus something that is universal?
I think kind of back to the emotionality aspect, like, thinking about just a lot of pop songs. He broke my heart, I'm so upset. That's something that I think we all know, and if we haven't felt it personally, we can at least sympathize or empathize.
Yeah.
But like, I think about like Home is a Fire, kicking this whole thing off with like, everything is changing. Nothing is the same, and kind of like this realization of, oh God, how have I gotten here when however many years ago I was somewhere completely different. It's finding specificity with an emotion that everybody feels. And the words that they're using, plates they will shift, houses will shake, fences will drift, I can't even fucking remember the next lyric. We will awake. There it is. We will awake.
Yep.
And
only to find nothing's the same.
when you only to find nothing's the same. When you hear that, at first you might not really hear each of those words, and then when you do, I think to me it hit me like a ton of bricks. And so as much as I've been saying this whole time, this is broader, this is more general, but I appreciate what you just said. There's a difference between generality and universality. And I think we as artists can appreciate this. When you, as the artist, get specific with what you're feeling, it becomes a universal thing that can apply to so many different people.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, because there's the other word. The other word that comes to mind is accessibility. Too,
yeah,
right.
Totally.
Like, I think those things are all related, and we had a professor in school who will remain nameless, who gave me feedback one time, who said, when all she said was, "The general is the death of art," and I was like, "Damn, okay." And so it's something I think about a lot, and I'm like, I'm still trying to figure out. How you're precise. And you're like, you don't say, you say you're efficient and also being specific, while also making something relatable and accessible to your audience, right? Like that's the alchemy, right? And I think we see that he's been successful with that a lot in his career. I'm trying to figure out what those magic beans are.
Well, it's still, I mean, they're still making art with this album. It's just like, I guess for me, I think of it in terms of like a visual art comparison. Like up until this point, they had been veering closer to photorealism on that spectrum. And this album feels more like a Monet to me.
Yeah.
Or
Literally,
like a
you
Van
said
Gogh.
in your 60-second wrap up, you said impressionistic, and I was like, that is fucking it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still capturing something specific. It's just, they've changed the filter a little bit on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's talk about standards for perfection, shall we? We asked you to nominate some albums for us that were not AM by Arctic Monkeys, that you believe were perfect. So we've talked a lot about kind of your personal relationship with this thing, but in like a technical sense, if there was a rubric that you were using to judge the perfection of an album, what were those standards? What was on that sheet?
Unified philosophy of an album.
Yeah.
I love, if, as a mix CD girl, love individual songs and the way that one song can make me feel. But to me, if an album has such a hodgepodge of songs that I can't figure out what the theme is, what the story that the album is trying to tell is, it feels too disjointed. When I want to listen to a whole album, it's because I want you to tell me a story. And so each individual song should absolutely be unique and something that can stand alone that's standalone and makes me feel one way. But if it's not a part of a grander story, then I'm just like, I don't need to listen to the rest of the album. That's okay. I'll just put this song in a playlist and that's fine.
So something greater, something it's attached to a bigger picture.
Absolutely. Emotionality, we already talked about. It has to make me feel something. And I said this too, that the melody and the rhythm and the musicality of things is what usually grabs my attention first. But if later down the line, as I continue listening to stuff, if the lyrics don't stand out, once I hear a line, if it doesn't stick in my heart for at least 36 hours, 36 minimum.
36-hour rule.
Then I'm like, that's a nice song, but it doesn't really mean anything.
Sure.
And that's probably my training is in classical acting, so I'm a very big words girl.
She loves words, this one.
I love words. Words, as Hamlet says.
So the 36-hour, I'm going to give you 1,000,000 points for the 36-hour rule because it's so specific. I'm going to put a timer on that. People have different opinions on the skips thing. I know you talked about, it has to have sort of like a larger picture, a larger thing that it's going for. When you listen to this album, do you listen to it as a whole? Do you listen to it bit by bit? And if you do, like, are there skips? Is that allowed on a perfect album for you?
Yes, I think skips are allowed. And I love actually that you use the word allowed, because I'm a very big believer that art belongs to the recipient of the art and not whoever made it. Obviously, there are certain rules about that, but for the most part, however you feel about art, you are correct. So in my mind, yes, skips are allowed. They are encouraged. I do have a track on here that I skip usually, but yes, I usually listen to this album as a whole. I think it has a great arc. Every now and then I'll skip to a couple favorites if I'm like, I want to feel this type of way, and I know this song is going to make me feel that type of way. But usually I actually, as I mentioned, in how I fell in love with this album was in springtime, and it's just about every spring I dust this one off and listen to it a few times over the course of a few weeks. Yeah.
What I'm about to say does not impact the verdict that will happen later on, but as I listened to this multiple times, this one didn't stick with me. Like, it didn't hit me in my heart. It didn't hit me in my head the same way as some of their other albums do. And like, I couldn't figure out what that was. I don't know. Maybe it's because of this thing you're talking about. Maybe I'm drawn more towards like specific imagery within an album. I guess I wonder what you would say to someone who is like encountering Death Cab, and maybe they like listen to the whole catalog and they get to this one. Like, if their response is like, what's this? Like, what do you say to someone to get them to listen to it differently so that maybe they hear it the same way you do?
Honestly, I'd say you're right. Like what I just said, if the art belongs to the recipient, but to for the sake of argument, I'll go along here.
Okay.
I would say like, okay, tell me what it is that you liked about their earlier stuff, and I agree with you very much that it's like it's this very photorealism, a lot of their previous music, and it's like, okay, that's great and that's wonderful, and that impacted me as well when I'm going through their earlier things. Look at some of the lyrics as you listen to it, because sometimes you can't really hear it correctly, right? And this is again my perspective as a words girly, and think like for each song, what did these words bring up for you? What imagery comes up for you? They're not painting a super clear picture for you anymore. You get to decide what the picture is. And does that change how that you then feel about the song when you get to kind of let that come up in a unique and natural way to your perspective and your experience?
Yeah, I guess maybe in some respects it's more like it's more like a Radiohead album in that respect, in that like it's not immediately accessible, which I think like, and maybe because of the fact that like I have such a preconceived notion about what Death Cab for Cutie is, the fact that I encounter an album where their music makes me have to like work a little bit more for it. I'm like, no, this isn't your bag. This isn't the lane you're supposed to be in, which is super reductive of me to think that. But like, maybe I was approaching the album not incorrectly, but like not in a way that maximizes its potential.
Well, it's like Andre 3000, who just came out with that like flute album, and everyone's like,
album.
What?
Oh, yeah.
I've listened to it. I've listened to it.
Is that
a
who
lot,
just did it?
And I think that album is. I've listened to that album multiple times a week since it came out. I think it's really good. That's a really good point.
And I am not familiar with them, and I have no opinions except for, hey, he gets to do whatever he wants. Sorry, you guys. Like he's
True.
And you can buy the album or you can't. But there we go. And you're right. Your opinion is right. But it like that makes complete sense to me. If your experience or other people's experience was different, was because this was my big into Death Cab. I had known some of their stuff, but I wasn't an aficionado of it until this album. So that might be why it impacts me differently than others, and why there's more shade for this one than I would have thrown.
Yeah, we can give you Evan Saudi's email if you want to contact him. So,
thank you.
We do know him, so yeah.
Thank you. I'll say, listen, you're right. But
I want to retroactively give you some points. 400,000 points for Art Belongs to the Recipient, because I do think that's like an ongoing conversation. And
yes,
we recently talked about Graceland, which is a very fraught album and contextually, and I think that was a really I think Derek, our guest on that album, probably he would have loved that take that Art Belongs to the Recipient, and I think he kind of expressed that in some ways. Yeah. And then also I wanted to you're speaking to the different standards that we hold artists to, right? Like depending who they are. And Michael, your response kind of touches on that too. Like I'm reflecting now on, like, I know I keep using these examples, but it's just kind of like the biggest examples for us, the different standards that I hold Beyonce and Taylor Swift to, right? Like they are particular and based on my experience and my biases. And it's like really, it's a fun thing to think critically about that when somebody kind of puts it to you. So you get, I'm going to say 1 million points for shining a light on the different, you both get 1 million points for shining a light on the different standards that we hold artists to. I think it's worth mentioning real quick before we go to the board that this was the last album that fully featured Chris Walla as a participant. I guess did you feel any dedication to him as a member of the band? Did you feel like you noticed his absence after this album?
No.
I'm leaving that pause in the edit, by the way. that edit was great. Yeah, okay, good to know. You know, he was, I think as I look back on it, I'm like, oh, there's some different sound to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really been at its core,
difference, yes. Absence missed, maybe not.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm just gonna give you 20,000 more points for that take.
Thanks.
The Chris Waller take. Great. Well, you know, you've spoken so beautifully about what you love about music. Your words serve you well, my friend.
I'm a words girly.
She's a words girly. So, but we have to figure out if you won, because it is about winning. This is all about winning. So we're going to go back through the points on the board, and then we're going to put it to Michael to make the final decision. All right. Gave you 20,000 points for that Chris Waller take. Love that. Hope Chris out there somewhere just knows that we just love Ben. 1,000,000 points to the both of you for shining a light on the different standards that we hold artists to. 400,000 points for talking about how art belongs to the recipient at the end of the day. 1,000,000 points for the 36-hour rule, and that you know that if it's a lyric has stuck with you for that long, then it must be good. 60,000 points for this album having a unified philosophy, and that being kind of what gives it life, that higher level focus and the thing that it's shooting for. 15,000 points for Spring in Ohio. If Ben hasn't written a song titled that already, then he probably should, because it's a missed opportunity. 50,000 points for sliding into Frightened Rabbit's DMs before there were DMs to slide into. I'm sure they were flattered. 1,000,000 points for the Twilight baseball scene. Michael, I'm going to share that with you. It's ridiculous. It is camp.
Right. Okay.
Oh, yes. The Twilight baseball scene is camp, is what it is.
All right. I'll be the judge of that.
You will be. 10,000 points for you inspiring Michael to drop names. Michael's not a name dropper. He doesn't do that. 20,000 points for Gimme the Loot. So I hope the loot training is going well. Add all that to the A+ that you gave Michael for his 60-second recap of Death Cab and this album. And I'd say the board is looking pretty strong, but at the end of the day, it has to go to the guy, the one and only Michael Osinski. Michael, you heard the case that Sarah made. Very, very specific, cutting case, if you ask me. Is Codes and Keys by Death Cab for Cutie a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
I mean, I came into this conversation a little skeptical, as I think I've alluded to throughout the whole episode. But I think you made a strong case, and you sold me. It can go to 11. It can join the pantheon.
Yeah,
I win.
If anything, the Chris Waller take that was the nail in the coffin. You did it.
What can I say? Your Honor, I have it's been a pleasure defending this album. So
all right. Sarah, we asked you to choose a standout track from this album, but we also choose a standout track from every album that we cover. Are you curious to know? Do you want to guess which one you think we chose?
Well, because my other two would be You Are a Tourist or Home is a Fire. But I love to hear. I mean, I see, because I could keep going, and then Codes and Keys is great.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously that's like the name. Like, I can't stop. So yeah, no, I'm super curious. I'd love to hear it.
Well, we went back and forth on it a little bit. It was a difficult decision, I think, because of the sort of. I think it was Michael. I think it was our preconceived notions that made this decision so hard for us. But we decided to go with the opening track, "Home is a Fire." I think one album or one artist we haven't invoked that I kind of got shades of in this is Television. You know, like sort of that post-punk, you know, Marquee Moon kind of thing. That sort of 80s thing that I know Ben was influenced by. I kind of got shades of that throughout the album, and this is a good example of that. And I also just think lyrically, like you mentioned earlier when you referenced this song, it does invoke a little bit of the lyrical spirit of Death Cab that I know them to, that I know and love them for. So those are reasons why I loved it. Michael, what made this one the one for you?
I mean, I think part of it was I wanted to make sure our listeners also got a song that sort of had a little more of that electronic influence again, because it's not like, like I said before, it's not like umcha, but something that would sort of complement Underneath the Sycamore and give people a better representation of the album as a whole. And also, I mean, I think it actually is kind of like this nice, sneaky little mysterious track to open the album. I feel like there's two ways to successfully open an album. Like, one is like knock the door down, or one is sort of like, I don't know, sneak underneath the whatever you call the thing at the bottom of a door. What's it called?
The door jam.
That's it. Yes,
what
like
it is?
yeah, or something like that. And this kind
going
of
through the dog door.
Exactly, it goes into the dog door.
Yes.
And this one does kind of sneak in like that. So we did think about You Are a Taurus, but this one I think spoke to us more right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sarah, this has been fun. This has been a real treat to have you on. You're just you're one of my best buddies, and I couldn't be more pleased that we found an opportunity for you to come on. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, same. I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me. Always good to chat art and life with you all.
We need more words girlies on this. We've had a few words girlies on, and you're among an auspicious crowd.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, words are hard, but we love them.
We do. Well, listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. Go give Codes and Keys a little listen, and then go dive deep into the Death Cab discography. It's fun. You're just gonna feel like a sad boy for a little while, and we all should, right?
Yes.
You listen to this podcast, so you must have a little sad boy in you, right? Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you soon.